Oke.
Baik, terima kasih Bapak Dr. Muhammad Fadafi untuk sambutannya. Mungkin nanti bisa dilanjut lagi juga dengan Ibu Profesor Amelia ya Bu ya. Oke, kita beranjak ke acara inti pada hari ini, yaitu diskusi Open Minds. Baik, terima kasih Bapak Dr. Muhammad Fadafi. Ya, baik, mari kita berlanjut ke acara yang selanjutnya, itu acara inti pada hari ini, diskusi Open Minds, dengan judul Is There a Future for Islamic History? So, selanjutnya saya akan menyerahkan diskusi ini akan langsung dipandu oleh Ibu Profesor Dr. Amelia Fauzia. Pada Ibu Profesor Dr. Amelia Fauzia, waktu dipersilakan.
Baik, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ya, senang sekali pada siang hari ini kita bisa bertemu tatap muka dengan media virtual Zoom untuk berbincang, terutama mendengar pencerahan dari guru kita, guru saya khususnya, Profesor Niko Kapten, tentang yang terkait dengan sejarah Islam. Tadi disampaikan oleh Mbak Febri bahwa, dan tadi diantar oleh Pak Khodafi dari APSI, bahwa memang kegiatan webinar Open Minds ini intinya adalah untuk membantu membuat kajian sejarah Islam, khususnya kajian mengenai Indonesia dan kajian mengenai Islam, bagi mahasiswa dan dosen-dosen yang memang wilayah kajiannya itu. Senang sekali pada hari ini, sebenarnya yang mendaftar cukup banyak, dan Prof. Niko, peserta hari ini cukup beragam dari berbagai UIN, IAIN di Indonesia, tidak hanya dari UIN Jakarta. Kalau dari UIN Jakarta ini ada banyak mahasiswa, terima kasih ya para mahasiswa Miss mahasiswa saya yang hadir. Untuk apa ya, mau mendengarkan, mau mencari tahu sebenarnya, karena 2 bulan yang lalu atau sebulan yang lalu, Pak Niko, saya diundang oleh Pak Khodafi untuk bicara terutama untuk mahasiswa SPI di Surabaya. Jadi yang saya dengar adalah tentang kira-kira mau kemana sih mahasiswa yang mengkaji sejarah itu, masa depannya seperti apa. Jadi kelihatan ada kegamangan, masa depan kita yang mengkaji sejarah seperti apa. Lalu kira-kira masih menarik nggak sih? Apalagi era sekarang, era 4.0, bahkan ada yang 5.0 sudah maju teknologinya. Dan pekerjaan-pekerjaan ke depan juga mungkin mengarah ke globalisasi dan teknologi. Dan kira-kira kajian sejarah itu posisinya di mana gitu. Nah, ini ada pertanyaan dari mahasiswa yang galau, kalau bahasa zaman sekarang, bahasa di Indonesia Pak Niko, galau. Apalagi kita tahu kajian-kajian tentang fenomena dunia Islam sekarang juga yang terlihat ya, misalnya ada berbagai kasus, ada ekstremisme, yang tadinya Indonesia dianggap the smiling Islam, juga kemudian terlihat banyak gerakan-gerakan yang radikal dari Indonesia. Nah, jadi lagi-lagi itu yang ditanyakan oleh mahasiswa. Apalagi misalnya di Australia, kajian tentang studi Indonesian Studies di beberapa universitas juga ditutup gitu. Nah, ini kemana, mau dibawa kemana nih masa depan sejarah? Padahal kita menganggap sejarah itu penting sekali. Tapi saya kira di sini ada guru kita, ada Profesor Niko Kapten, yang akan memberi kita pencerahan tentang masa depan studi sejarah Islam, dan nanti akan banyak merujuk kepada bagaimana Islam dan sejarah Islam yang di Indonesia, karena memang ekspertis Profesor Niko itu ya tentang sejarah Islam di Indonesia dan dengan Timur Tengah. Saya kenalkan dulu ya Bapak Ibu dan kawan-kawan sekalian, siapa sih Profesor Niko Kapten ini? Saya sangat berhutang budi sama Profesor Niko Kapten. Beliau adalah guru saya, pembimbing tesis saya di Leiden University. Di Leiden, sorry, saya salah pencet. Di Leiden University, dulu tahun 96 saya di sana. Jadi saya sangat budi sekarang ini karena salah satunya dari berguru dan bimbingan dari Profesor Niko Kapten. Pak Niko ini S1, S2 dan S3-nya di Universitas Leiden, kajiannya tentang sejarah dan studi Islam. Mulai studi Islam itu tahun 74. Nah, saya kira ini masih banyak yang belum lahir ya tahun 74 ya. Tapi Pak Niko sudah belajar tentang Islam pada tahun-tahun itu di Leiden, dan kemudian menerbitkan banyak sekali buku-buku. Salah satu bukunya dan keahlian Pak Niko adalah tentang Said Usman. Jadi tahun 2014 menuliskan tentang bagaimana seorang tokoh Arab di Indonesia yang bernama Said Usman itu diterbitkan oleh Brill. Beberapa buku yang lain juga saya kira sangat menarik, tapi intinya melihat, nah lagi-lagi ini diskursus keilmuannya adalah melihat bagaimana fenomena Islam di Indonesia dan dihubungkan dengan Islam secara umum di Timur Tengah, Indonesia dan Asia Tenggara. Dan Profesor Niko adalah sekarang Profesor bidang Asia Tenggara di Universitas Leiden. Pengalamannya luar biasa, banyak, fellowship-nya juga banyak. Saya kira saya mengikuti jejaknya Pak Niko ini, melakukan banyak penelitian dan fellowship di beberapa perguruan tinggi kelas dunia. Dan satu lagi yang penting, nah ini saya lihat di biografinya, kalau teman-teman bisa nebak berapa banyak bahasa yang dikuasai oleh Pak Niko, berapa bahasa? Ada 10 bahasa yang dikuasai oleh Pak Niko Kapten. Kalau kita hitungannya mungkin sedikit ya, tapi ini luar biasa. Jadi dengan keahlian bahasa ini, termasuk di antara bahasa Arab dan bahasa Indonesia, hari ini Pak Niko bisa dikatakan adalah salah satu ahli yang terkemuka mengenai Islam di Asia Tenggara dan Indonesia. Oke, saya ingin say hello dulu ke Pak Niko. Senang sekali bisa hadir di sini. Saya akan unmute suaranya. Ya.
Oke. Ya.
Ya. Oke. Bisa hadir di sini. Terima kasih atas ketersediaan waktunya untuk kami di sini. Ini banyak mahasiswa dan dosen yang ingin belajar tentang sejarah Islam dan terutama ingin ingin dapat pencerahan. Kira-kira kalau pertanyaan besarnya tentang sebenarnya masa depan sejarah Islam itu seperti apa sih, kajian sejarah Islam. Kalau boleh saya bertanya, Pak Niko, mungkin apa Pak Niko bisa dengar suara saya dengan baik? Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes.
Ya, oke. Ya, saya ingin mengawali pertanyaan yang besar dulu. sebelum nanti Pak Niko bisa bicara banyak tentang apa ya, bagaimana sih studi sejarah Islam ini bisa tetap menarik dan penting di era sekarang ini.
Okay, so you want me to, well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity, and good afternoon, everybody here in the Netherlands. It's still early in the morning, still dark outside. But if you don't mind, I will speak in English because I have not been now, due to the COVID situation, for quite some time to Indonesia, and I'm not so used any longer to speak it. But I trust that if I speak in English, it will not be a real problem. Huh? Okay, I
Yes.
have thought of an interesting issue to discuss, and this is in the framework of this seminar. And as you can see, the title which I thought of was, "Is there a future for Islamic history?" ending in a question mark. And of course, this is a little bit a kind of a provocative title. And this is actually precisely what I mean. What I mean with Islamic history is, of course, the study of Islamic history, right, as an academic discipline. And the reason why I have phrased this question in a kind of an alarming way is that when we look to the study of Islam, you see that, at least it is what I see in my own university, in Leiden University, but I think also in a lot of other universities. And what you also see among the students, the interest of the students, is that students and people think of Islamic studies, what they are primarily interested in is that they want to look into Islam and Islamic studies from the point of view of security studies, right? Is Islam a danger to society? And what they are also interested in is Islam, the role of Islam in international studies, right? In a role of Islam in bilateral relations, role of Islam in international organizations, and so on and so forth. So this interest is all related to the present, to current affairs. And moreover, the issues which people tend to be interested in is not only the present, now, contemporary issues, but also political issues, right? So the focus is now on contemporary political dimensions of Islam. If you look to Islam as a culture and as a religion, you see that, of course, Islam is incredibly rich and diverse, and it includes so many, very, very many different dimensions that if you reduce the academic focus on just contemporary politics, this is really a very, very poor, poor approach. And in this respect, I could mention a very interesting book, which is called What is Islam? It was written by a scholar from Harvard, Shahab Ahmed. And in this book, he tries to define Islam as a field of studies. I do not know, Professor Amelia, if this book by Shahab Ahmed is known in Indonesia at all. It is called What is Islam?
I'm afraid no. I'm afraid not popular.
Okay, it is very interesting, maybe someone from the audience knows, but it's a very interesting book because the title is very simple. What is Islam? I think it was from 2016 or so, but what he is doing, this scholar, is that he tries to define Islam as a field of study and is deliberately looking into basically any dimension of Islam. He says, well, people now tend to focus, for instance, very much on aspects of Islamic law, Islamic jurisprudence. This also has to do, of course, with the presence of a Wahhabi dominant in Islamic studies and also in the media. But he says, if you just focus on law, this is really a poor focus because there's so much more. And what there is more is, for instance, theology, it is mysticism, and so on and so forth. And what he is also doing in this book, and this is very interesting in relation to the study of Islam in Southeast Asia, he says, well, in Islamic studies, also the focus tends to be in terms of geography on the Middle East. And there might be some underlying prejudice at work because people might think that in the Middle East you have the real Islam. This is where Islam came into being. And the further you leave this original, original center, the less authentic Islam is becoming. This is also an idea which Shahab Ahmed is very much against, which an idea which he does not like at all. He says, if you look to history of Islam, if you look to the culture of Islam, you see that also outside the Middle East, there's a very rich history. There's a very interesting intellectual life. And by just focusing on the Middle East, this is also something which is not good. So what he is actually saying that you should study Islam, what he calls from the Balkan Bengalen. So as a geographical focus, he takes basically the entire Islamic world. So he is also including deliberately Asia, but also Africa. He does not speak a lot, unfortunately, about Indonesia, but this is also part of his agenda. So he sees Islam as a very, very broad category. So not only focusing on law, and also in geographical terms, he is also seeing Islam in the broadest possible terms, including everything. In this respect, it's also interesting to mention another book which came out recently, I think a few months ago. This is by Chiara Forni, and it's called Asia and Islam. I don't know if you have heard about this already, but in this book, she is also trying to move away from this focus on Middle East in Islamic studies. It's also a very interesting book. So these are a few reflections on the study of Islam. I think so maybe a few more remarks on Shahab Ahmed. What he is saying is that Islam is actually not only a religion, but it is also a culture. And so the study, for instance, of architecture, the study of coins, study of food, all these type of things, they all belong to the study of Islam. And not only in contemporary times, but also in the past. So return to my original question. I think it is very important also to study Islamic history because it is part of the general study of Islam and not to confine ourselves to contemporary political issues. And I think for this reason, UIN Jakarta, and in particular Professor Amelia, should be congratulated because the master program, which you are running now, has recently been approved. And this is, to my mind, an important signal from the creation of your university that indeed Islamic history is not neglected in your part of the world, right? And in your university. And I also think that it is very important that in the field of Islamic history and also field of history of Islam in Southeast Asia, it is indeed very, very important that people like you, so professors, teachers, students, and so on and so forth, make contributions to this because you have a very good access to a lot of sources. And if you ask me, and this is maybe final remark, Professor Amelia, the future of Islamic history and the future of Islamic history in Indonesia is not in the United States, it's not in Europe, but it is in Indonesia itself. This history should be continued to be practiced by Indonesian scholars. We have very good Indonesian scholars now who belong to the top of the field, and I think that if we move on for maybe one more generation, the center of the study of Islamic history in Indonesia will be in Indonesia itself. So this is a final remark to round off, and I would like to return the floor to the chair. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pak Niko. There are so many important points here. I would like to a little bit summarize Pak Niko's point. Bapak, Ibu, dan kawan sekalian, tadi menarik sekali Pak Niko bilang, kenapa sih masa depan kajian sejarah Islam itu masih penting, sangat penting. Jadi pertama dari sisi cara pandangnya dulu, karena selama ini yang sering melihat tentang Islam, memberi pandangan itu dari hanya melihat lebih banyak dari studi-studi yang berdimensi politik kontemporer. Udah gitu studi Islam itu hanya dilihat dari sisi hukum, ya lebih banyak hukum, padahal kajian Islam bisa dilihat dari banyak bidang studi. dari arsitektur, dari teologi, ada mistisisme dan lain sebagainya, banyak sekali. Dan satu lagi yang penting adalah banyak orang studi Islam itu hanya melihat dari geografi saja yang dianggap menjadi center of Islam, yaitu di Timur Tengah gitu. Jadi karena kalau melihatnya ke sana, makanya ada kesimpulan masa depannya tidak cerah kira-kira gitu. Tapi kalau cara pandangnya diubah, melihatnya lebih ke sini, ke Asia Tenggara, ke Indonesia tadi yang dicontohkan, kelihatannya masa depannya akan cerah karena banyak sekali ada kekayaan yang didapat, yang bisa dilihat di kajian-kajian Islam di Asia Tenggara, di Indonesia, yang sebenarnya masa depannya Pak Niko bilang itu justru di Indonesia, di Asia Tenggara. Jadi itu lagi-lagi kenapa? Karena ini juga saya kira kalau bisa saya komentar bahwa yang dikritik oleh tadi ada 2 buku yang disebutkan oleh Pak Niko, satu buku yang sangat penting tentang What is Islam, mungkin nanti bisa dicari ya para mahasiswa. Buku itu yang mengkritik cara pandang sehingga yang dilihatnya adalah real Islam. Real Islam itu ujung-ujungnya adalah Timur Tengah, selalu seperti itu. Padahal cara pandang itu tidak tepat karena dunia Islam itu sangat luas, tidak hanya di Timur Tengah. Dan justru masa depannya kalau kita melihat perkembangan saat ini ada di Asia Tenggara, Indonesia, sangat menjanjikan masa depannya kira-kira. Dan jika masa depan itu menjanjikan, justru kajian sejarah itu menjadi titik tolak yang penting. Tadi juga menyebut ada studinya Chiara Formici, nah nanti bisa dicari teman-teman tentang studi Asia Tenggara, kajian Islam di Asia Tenggara. I have one more question, Pak Niko, because you mentioned about Southeast Asia, right? You mentioned about Southeast Asia, the importance of Southeast Asia. If we refer to some recent scholar discussion about the let's say cultural spheres, cultural centers of Islam in the world. People mention about 8: Southeast Asia, China, Islam in China, Islam in Europe, Islam in, of course, South Asia, right? Islam in, of course, Africa, Middle East. So, what is the distinctive outlook of Islam in Southeast Asia? Jadi saya tanya teman-teman ke Pak Niko, sebenarnya kalau pembagian katanya ada 8 cultural spheres tentang dunia Islam itu dibagi ada 8 kira-kira yang budaya Islaminya, dan salah satunya adalah Asia Tenggara. Sebenarnya apa sih distingsi Islam di Asia Tenggara, sehingga nanti mungkin teman-teman yang akan mengkaji dan para dosen bisa menggali lebih dalam lagi. Could you please answer, Pak Niko?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. This is indeed a very important question, and this has to do, of course, with the comparison, right, between different Muslim societies. Why is one society different from another one, right? And of course, it depends very much on how you define the criteria through which you can judge these differences. And these criteria very often think in a kind of a hierarchy, right? So one type of Islam is better than another type of Islam. And of course, what you see is that many people think, well, Islam in the East is better, and so on and so forth. I think if you look at it from an academic perspective, you cannot really say that one type of Islam is better than another type of Islam, right? Of course, we all have our personal convictions and our personal criteria. For instance, you can look at the position of women, for instance, right? Or you can look at human rights. If you apply this as a criteria to compare Muslim societies, of course, you can come across different findings, right? But I think if you look at Islam in different societies, in principle, all these societies, they are they are all informed by all kinds of Islamic ideas, Islamic notions. Some ideas are more stronger expressed in society than others, but on a whole, I would say there is not a very big difference. Of course, in on a theoretical level, because all societies are informed by Islamic notions mixed with all kinds of local notions, and this is the case everywhere. This is also, for instance, the case in societies where they claim to be completely Islamic, right? Like, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, there are all local customs playing a role. And the degree of how these local customs and these Islamic notions play together, of course, this differs everywhere. But on a theoretical level, there is not a real big difference, I would argue. And if you want to speak about specific characteristics for Southeast Asia, for instance, you can see in practice, you can see this, right? You might argue that in the history of Islam in Southeast Asia, mysticism has played a big role, right? But also, of course, in all kinds of other Muslim societies, mysticism has also played a role, right? So you speak about differences in degree and not really differences in principle. So this is basically kind of a that on a theoretical level, Muslim societies, they are all informed by Islamic notions, but also by local notions and I don't know, all kinds of other issues. Does this answer your question a little bit, Amelia?
Yeah. Thank you. It answer my question. Saya akan summary lagi dalam bahasa Indonesia singkat saja bahwa Profesor Niko tidak melihat ada distingsi yang sangat besar gitu, karena sebenarnya secara prinsip kalau kita mau membandingkan pasti semua ada perbedaan dari satu budaya Islam ke budaya Islam yang lain, pasti itu ada. Tapi secara prinsip sebenarnya hampir mirip-mirip, hampir sama. Dan ada satu poin yang menarik tadi bahwa sebenarnya di semua budaya Islam itu ada semacam ada pengaruh lokal terhadap ajaran Islam, sehingga kemudian ekspresinya akan berbeda. Ekspresi di Asia Tenggara, ekspresi di Saudi, ekspresi di tempat lain, ekspresi Islam di Eropa itu berbeda, walaupun prinsip-prinsipnya tentu saja sama, ajarannya sama, tapi diekspresikan dengan berbeda. Itu saya kira menarik. Bahkan ekspresi yang berbeda ini, pengaruh budaya lokal ini termasuk juga ada di Saudi Arabia. Saya setuju sekali bahwa memang kita kadang taken for granted bahwa Islam hanya ada yang seperti ini, yang satu, yang sama dari Saudi. Padahal di Saudi Arabia sendiri itu juga ada pengaruh lokal. Saya kira itu poin yang menarik dari jawaban Pak Niko. Sebelum saya akan bertanya lagi satu lagi ya, nanti saya persilakan kepada Bapak Ibu kawan-kawan semua. Yes, sorry, Niko.
May I
Yes,
add
please.
something?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
The thing is, of course, that it's very often said that Islam in Southeast Asia or Islam in Indonesia is tolerant, right? This is mentioned as a main characteristic, and this is then put in contrast with Islam in the Middle East, which is radical. And people say in Indonesia, if there is radicalism, this is not us. This comes from the outside. This comes from abroad, right? So you see that here, there is very much, this is a kind of thinking in stereotypes. And this thinking in stereotypes very much ideological dimension to it, right? And I would argue that, of course, in Indonesia, many people are tolerant, many Muslims are tolerant, but there are also many Muslims who are not tolerant, right? And the same goes for in Egypt. Many Egyptians are tolerant, but there are also Egyptians who are not tolerant. And so it is very often said in Indonesia, if there is radicalism, this is not us, it comes from outside. But if you look further, you can also see the same idea, for instance, in Tajikistan, right? Muslims in Tajikistan say, we are tolerant, and the troubles come from the outside, right? So you see, this is more of a kind of ideological position. And when we study Islam, we should be very careful and to take this along in our arguments to see if we are making the claims on Islam, we should be honest to ourselves and we should try to determine whether this is real historical fact or whether also perhaps this ideological position might play a role. So it is a difficult issue, but a very interesting issue for that matter. Thank you.
Ya, terima kasih Prof. Niko atas tambahannya. Saya akan summary-kan lagi, tapi sebelum itu silahkan Bapak Ibu kawan-kawan yang ingin bertanya dari jawaban-jawaban tadi perbincangan kami berdua, yang mau bertanya silahkan bisa di chat atau bisa ada reaksi tangan misalnya kalau mau bertanya sebelum nanti sesi yang ketiga saya akan setelah sesi yang ketiga. Jadi silakan mulai dari sekarang boleh pergunakan chat untuk bertanya. Tadi Pak Prof. Niko saya kira penting sekali ini dari sisi metodologi Bapak Ibu kawan-kawan sekalian bahwa kadang ada asumsi yang kita sering sampaikan ketika melihat fenomena di negara kita terutama terkait ada fenomena intoleransi radikal dan sering sekali diklaim atau dibilang bahwa yang radikal itu dari luar, bukan dari kita, bukan dari dalam. Nah mungkin ini harus dilihat ulang klaim-klaim seperti ini karena dikhawatirkan ini memang klaim yang kurang berdasar karena di hampir semua tempat itu selalu saja ada fenomena yang toleran dan yang radikal. Jadi pastilah fenomena universal. Di Indonesia yang toleran banyak, Prof. Niko bilang, tapi ada juga yang radikal. Begitu juga di Mesir. Dan tadi ada contoh menarik di Tajikistan. Muslim di Tajikistan juga sama saja bilang, sama kayak kita di Indonesia bilang, kita ini toleran. Yang trouble ini, yang banyak radikal ini datangnya dari luar. Gitu. Nah, ini kira-kira fenomena sama. Jadi ini satu tantangan metodologi yang disampaikan oleh Prof. Niko bagi kita yang mengkaji Islam, mengkaji diri kita sendiri, mengkaji pemahaman, menjadi fenomena masyarakat kita sendiri, terutama di Asia Tenggara dan Indonesia, untuk bisa lebih terbuka dan memperlihatkan data-data, fakta-fakta historis sehingga nanti bisa dalam tanda kutip agak jujur gitu membaca fenomena. Saya kira itu poin yang sangat menarik karena seringkali ada klaim-klaim yang digunakan narasinya di masyarakat yang sering kita dengar. Kalau boleh, one more question, Pak Niko. Ini menarik. Saya selalu menyampaikan ke mahasiswa tentang kalau kita mau melakukan penelitian, if we do research, we need to have two kind of things. First is we need to have case studies or data, and another thing we need to have a kind of diskursus keilmuan. Jadi saya sering bilang teman-teman kalau mau melakukan penelitian jangan lupa bahwa kita harus membumi, kita harus punya studi kasus, punya datanya yang real, apalagi ini kajian sejarah, bukan hanya summary dari buku, tapi kita punya datanya, apalagi sumber primer, studi kasusnya jelas gitu. Nah, dan kita punya diskursus keilmuannya. Diskursus keilmuannya misalnya kalau Prof. Niko itu bicara tentang religious authority. Misalnya. Kalau saya bicara tentang civil society. Atau fenomena yang lagi tren tentang intoleransi, pluralisme. Jadi kayak gitu. Nah, Prof. Niko ini kajiannya yang cukup detail, itu Islam di masa kolonial. Banyak dan terutama masyarakat Hadrami, dan yang saya lihat adalah sebenarnya ketika melihat masyarakat Hadrami atau masyarakat Muslim di 1 abad yang lalu, itu masyarakat Muslim melihat ada bagaimana masyarakat itu merespon terhadap perubahan zaman. Bagaimana masyarakat Muslim merespon terhadap perubahan zaman. Pak Niko menulis dari sisi religious authority-nya, dari sisi transformasinya, dan seterusnya. Dan apalagi kalau kita kaitkan dengan masyarakat kontemporer sekarang ini. Saya kira mirip-mirip kalau masyarakat kontemporer sekarang, kita juga secara tidak langsung melihat bagaimana kegamangan masyarakat ketika masuk ke nation state, ya kan, ide tentang negara Pancasila misalnya, tentang negara Islam atau khilafah, atau ada asumsi-asumsi bahwa ini yang Barat, ini yang Timur dan seterusnya. Jadi respon-respon seperti apa ya yang Prof. Niko bisa ambil dari kasus sejarah di masa kolonial, sejarah Islam di masa kolonial, di masa lalu, yang juga sebenarnya ada kesinambungan, ada kemiripan, mungkin saya tidak tahu, dengan fenomena sekarang, saat ini. Gitu. Mungkin bisa share dari hasil riset-riset yang ada, saya kira akan menarik karena kalau dalam studi sejarah kita biasanya menghubungkan yang lalu dengan yang fenomena yang sekarang. Mungkin bisa share sedikit dari temuan. Silakan, Prof. Niko.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think in doing research, you are completely right. You need to have data, right? And this is this is of course the first step, right? You need to have data, otherwise you don't have anything to write about. I mean, the data, this is of course important to realize, all data have been produced in a particular historical setting, right? In a particular context. And of course, the thing is that contexts, they change, right? So I think the keyword here might be changed. And of course, the interesting thing is that if you take Islam as an object in your studies, if you study Islam, you should also realize that Islam is also changing, right? It's changing all the time. Islam is not static. And I think this is something which is very important to realize, because there are, of course, also people who claim that Islam is not changing. Islam is something which is, well, God-given, and it's eternal, and this is complete, and this is final, and so on and so forth. And here, perhaps I can refer back again to the book of Shahab Ahmed, Islam. In speaking about Islam, he is tying in with the work of the anthropologist Talal Asad, who has said this: Islam is a discourse, right? And Shahab Ahmed also says Islam is a discourse. And this discourse is, let's say, communicated with the original fixed sources of Islam, like the Quran, like the Hadith, and so on and so forth. But it is also, let's say, constantly moving towards new situations. So in doing research, you should be always very aware of, if you have particular data, where do these data come from? When were they produced? By whom were they produced? Why were they produced? In other words, you should approach your data also, if it deals with Islam, with religion, you should always approach these data in a critical way. So, for instance, if you read Shafi'i, Kitab al for instance, and you want to learn how this book, let's say, landed in Indonesia, you should also look critically towards the person of Shafi'i itself, why he wrote it, what was his intention, and so on and so forth. So, in addition to data, you should also deal with this data critically. And Professor Amelia was mentioning referring to a number of, let's say, discourses perhaps, or narratives in which these data should be placed, like, for instance, tolerant or intolerant, but also, for instance, in terms of religious authority, but also in terms of the political setting, right? Whether particular data come from the colonial period or not, or perhaps, as Professor Amelia was saying, with regards to the changing of time. So you might perhaps say with regards to modernization, right? And an interesting example is, for instance, if you study the case of Ahmadiyya, the history of Ahmadiyya in Indonesia, you see that already in a very early stage, maybe the 1960s or so, there have been fatwas from MUI which condemned the Muhammadiyah. And they did this, and this is logical from a doctrinal point of view from Islam, because they deviate with the assessment of the person of the prophet, right? So already in the 1960s, these fatwas against Ahmadiyya were in circulation. But in terms of, let's say, the daily life of the Ahmadiyya population in Indonesia, that did not change a lot. But only later, in a different political context, you see that these fatwas started to play a new role, and that this did affect the Ahmadiyya population in Indonesia, to put it mildly, right? So you see, same ideas in same historical settings had a very, very different consequence for people involved, in this case, the Ahmadiyya, right? So this would be my my reaction. And if you think about this example, of course, you should also in your own research apply these ideas and be critical towards your data, right? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pak Niko. I'm sorry, ini di Parung listriknya tiba-tiba mati, jadi saya pindah. It's okay. Tadi poin yang sangat menarik saya kira bahwa tentang pentingnya data, dan sebagai sejarawan kita harus kritis melihat data itu sendiri. Karena data itu tidak datang tiba-tiba dari langit misalnya, tapi dia itu diproduksi. Jadi itu yang harus kita lebih aware, bahwa data itu dari mana, siapa yang menulisnya. Jadi kadang karena kita sudah ada klaim, ada image, ada data yang benar dari masyarakat, dari pemerintah, datanya ditolak. Dari pemerintah kolonial ditolak. Padahal semua data yang terkait peristiwa yang kita mau tulis itu harusnya dicari dan dikritisi, karena masing-masing ada kebaikan dan ada juga sesuatu yang mungkin harus dikritisi. Tadi juga menarik tentang bahwa sebenarnya fenomena kalau kita menulis sejarah, nah sejarah itu tadi merujuk kepada Sahab, bahwa Islam itu adalah diskursus dan fenomena masyarakat Islam itu berubah. Nah itu yang sebenarnya juga perlu menjadi menjadi awareness bagi teman-teman terutama sejarah, teman-teman di bidang sejarah yang kita menulis sejarah. Sudah ada yang nanya langsung nih kepada saya, ada dua sebenarnya, tapi saya untuk yang pertama saya akan ada mahasiswa dari Magister SKI, Mas Haryo Mojopahit, silakan untuk bertanya langsung kepada Prof. Kapten.
Ya. Ya, terima kasih banyak Prof. Amelia. Hello, Pak Niko. How are you? Yeah, Pak Niko, I have two questions. The first question is, I want to ask about, is there some niche in the Islamic history, especially in history in Southeast Asia, Islamic history in Southeast Asia. Because I think that as a graduate student, I think we want to know more about some areas or some topics that are not covered yet. So what are the topics that you think that need to be explored more for the young historians like us here? And the second question is, as Professor Amelia mentioned about the 8 hemispheres in the Islamic world. I think that the Middle East is only one of the hemisphere. I think that we have the Southeast Asia hemisphere, etc. And I think that mostly the narration of the Islamic history, what happened in the Middle East will be spread or will be connected or will influence other hemisphere. Let's say the pan-Islamism maybe in the early 20th century that have influence to other parts of the world, like in Indonesia. Or maybe like the transnationalism, transnational Islamic movement, such as like Ikhwanul Muslimin or maybe Hizbut Tahrir. They spread all over the world. Is that any case in our history, in the Islamic history? That what happened in one hemisphere other than Middle East influence or spread to other hemisphere, maybe from Indonesia and then spread into the Middle East. I think is that any case like that? I think that's all my questions. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Excellent question, Prof. Nico.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is a very, very important question. And before I forget, I already mentioned this book by Chiara Formigli. It's called Islam and Asia. And this is an approach book. And she is basically writing the history of Islam. Let's say how Islam influenced Asia and the other way around, how Asia influenced Islam, right? So this is a very interesting approach to look at Islamic history, I think. I really like the 2 questions actually by Harjo, and this is, they are both very, very big, and they might be turned into large research, right? If you ask me about gaps in the history of, let's say, Islam in Indonesia or Islam in South Asia, I think what is very important, and of course this is this also ties in with my previous remarks. Of course, in Indonesia, there are so very, very many sources related, which are relevant to the history of Islam in Indonesia. And the thing is, of course, that as an outsider like myself, sometimes it's very difficult to understand these sources because many of these sources are in local languages, right? Maybe I can give one example. We have, of course, the person of Christian Snoeker Gronje, who has played a very important role in the history of Islam in Indonesia, right? I'm sure you are familiar with his name. He was, let's say, from the end of the 19th century, he has been for quite a long time, maybe 25 or 30 years, the main architect of Islamic policies, right, of the colonial administration. Now, I come to my point. Of course, the biography of the person is very important. And we know, for instance, that he had been married with Sundanese wives in Indonesia. They also had children, right? But there are letters which the Sundanese family sent to him. So the children sent letters, and also family members like Muhammad Rusli. He also sent letters, but these letters are written in the Sundanese language. And Sundanese language in Arabic script, right? So Pegon. So who can read this? I could not say of a person in the Netherlands who can read this, but of course in Indonesia, there are many people who can read this. And actually, they have been now read, and they have also been included in a new biography on Suker Gronje, which will be published beginning of next year. And then you get, through these Sundanese sources, you get new information on the person of Suker Gronje, right? So this is just one example, but there are also many, many other examples. For instance, there have also been letters from Haji Hassan Mustafa, who has been a Pangulu in Aceh in the colonial times, and he ended his career as a Pangulu in Bandung. These letters are in Arabic, right? Well, we can read Arabic in the Netherlands, but I mean, in terms of gaps, Harjo, there are, of course, very, very many sources which have still not been explored. And you could also think, for instance, of a lot of Javanese manuscripts. Fortunately, a lot of these Javanese manuscripts and the Javanese literary culture has been studied by the late Professor Rick, who was the PhD supervisor of Ibu Amelia. And you see that this has really made a big contribution to the understanding of Sufism and the history of Sufism in Indonesia. So there are very, very many other more sources which still need to be explored. I am also working on a particular news source on which is relevant to the history of Indonesia. But to put it a little bit broader, what is, to my mind, a very important issue which needs to have more attention, and this is actually your second point. This is that that we have to place the development of Indonesian Islam and the history of Indonesian Islam in wider international or trans-regional developments, right? And of course, a lot of research has been done on, let's say, how, for instance, in the Pesantren world, the Kiai and the students were very, very much trained in Mecca, right, until the very beginning of the 20th century. This is, of course, very, very important. And I think what is, of course, also important, and this is also a topic which I would like to study myself a little bit more, what you see is that also a lot of books by Indonesian scholars, Indonesian ulama, Muslim scholars, have been printed in Mecca and later also in Cairo. And what does this mean? What does this say about the relationship between Islam in Indonesia and Islam in the Middle East? And of course, the major question which is relevant to this relationship between Islam in Indonesia and Islam in the Middle East, Mecca or Cairo, is whether this relationship was, in intellectual terms, was it a one-way traffic? In other words, did Indonesian scholars only take from Indonesia, from Mecca and Cairo, or did they also contribute it to the intellectual life there? Did they develop new ideas and so on and so forth? And this is an issue which, to my mind, if you ask me about gaps, which to my mind is still very much a gap, and there are still very much a lot of issues which have to be explored from this perspective. So I think this is a very interesting theme and a very interesting topic, and an excellent question, Harjo. In my own research at the moment, I work on a scholar from who originated from Minangkabau, Ahmed Khatib, and he is of course very well known in Indonesia, and he has been teaching in Mecca until his death in 1914, and the question is, or one of the main questions is, what was the intellectual exchange between Ahmed Khatib and Indonesia? Were people in Indonesia at that time, were they just, let's say, listening to the big guru from Mecca, or was Ahmed Khatib also influenced by developments in Indonesia, right? Was it a one-way traffic, or was it a two-way traffic? Was it a real exchange? And of course, this is, if you speak about different regions in the Muslim world, or hemispheres, as you put it, this is, of course, very important. If you look to, for instance, to India in relationship to other parts in the Muslim world, you see that from India, there have been particular ideas and particular notions which have been influential in outside their own hemisphere, right, in the entire Muslim world. I mentioned, for instance, the Ahmadiyya, right, which we already mentioned earlier. You might perhaps also think of these ideas, well, not really, but particular mystical ideas, like the one by Al-Burhanpuri, which were present in Mecca, about the Wahdat al-Wujud. They also, of course, it was also already there through earlier scholars from the Middle East, but this Al-Burhanpuri might have made it more popular. But you can also think of, let's say, the Tablighi movement, which also came from India and which is, for instance, also active in other parts of the world, like in Southeast Asia and so on and so forth. So these, let's say, contributions to Islamic history, important developments in Islamic history, which come not from the original Middle Eastern parts of the Muslim world, but from other parts. These are interesting to study. And of course, we and I myself are also very interested in developments which were important in Indonesia, which have been developed in Indonesia, ideas which were developed there, who might have spread to the rest of the Muslim world, right? I don't know if you could yourself think of an example, right?
Well, yeah, very interesting, sangat menarik sekali. Makin lama makin menarik diskusinya. Ini poin yang sangat penting menurut saya, diangkat oleh Prof. Niko tentang kadang kita melihat hanya pengaruh. Ketika melihat pengaruh itu hanya satu jalur gitu ya, satu arah. Jadi selalu melihat pengaruh dari Islam di Timur Tengah ke Indonesia, selalu seperti itu. Nah, ini Prof. Niko menyebutkan ada fenomena tren kajian terakhir termasuk yang dilakukan oleh Prof. Niko juga melihat sebenarnya ada two ways, ada dua arah. Bukan hanya pengaruh dari Timur Tengah, tapi juga dari Indonesia itu juga mempengaruhi fenomena di luar sana, di Timur Tengah ya, yang kalau kita lihat tidak mesti Timur Tengah. Dan saya kira ada studi-studi yang terakhir terbaru saya kira termasuk ada kalau nggak salah bukunya Michael Wiener ya, melihat itu, terus buku tentang haji saya kira juga begitu, dan saya juga mengikuti hal yang sama walaupun hanya masa kini ya. Jadi kayak misalnya kalau melihat filantropi, kalau dulu orang selalu melihatnya dari Timur Tengah, donasi itu masuknya ke Asia Tenggara, ke negara-negara miskin, tapi yang dianggap dunia ketiga. Tapi fenomena yang sekarang dari Indonesia, Asia Tenggara justru malah masuk ke negara-negara di Timur Tengah juga. Jadi ada two-way traffic. Ini poin yang sangat menarik dan bisa dieksplor oleh kawan-kawan sebagai satu diskursus keilmuan. Nanti kasusnya bisa apa saja, datanya bisa apa saja, tapi yang ditelitinya adalah mengenai dua traffic ini. Tadi contoh yang sangat bagus sekali, dan Prof. Niko sedang mengaji tentang Ahmad Khatib ya, di Minangkabau. Dan tadi ada poin satu lagi saya kira tentang sumber lokal. Tadi disebutkan tentang komunikasi anak-anaknya, keluarga dari Sunokudugronya yang ditulis dalam bahasa Sunda dengan karakternya, tulisannya Arab. Nah, jadi sebenarnya kesempatan bagi teman-teman yang sukunya besar di lingkungan Jawa, Sunda, ini ada yang dari Makassar, ada yang dari Parepare, ada yang dari Aceh ini, dan kawan-kawan sekalian, sebenarnya sumber lokal itu sangat penting. Sangat penting, dan disitulah kekayaannya yang tadi di awal disampaikan oleh Prof. Niko. Oke, ini ada yang mau bertanya lagi. Saya minta, sorry Niko, are you saying something? Oke, Tri Ramadan, Tri bisa langsung.
All right, thank you very much for Professor Amelia. Goedemorgen, Professor Niko Kaptein. Goedemorgen, goedemiddag for Professor Amelia. I have two simple questions for our discussion today. The first one is, what is your opinion about the Clifford Geertz theory about Islamic society? Clifford Geertz divided Islamic society, particularly in Java, into three groups. The first one is Santri, or a strong belief in Islam. Then the second one is Kiai, Islamic Noble Society, and Abangan, Islam for Just Identity. Is this theory still relevant for Indonesian situation right now or not? Then the second question is related to Professor Amelia before, that how important the role of Arabic language if we want to conduct Islamic studies research. Okay, I have just two questions this for Professor Nico. Thank you very much for letting me ask you, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, the line was not that good. Maybe Professor Amelia can repeat the questions.
Oh yeah, the first question is about the Gertz theory on Santri Priai Abangan.
Oh yeah.
And shortly, actually asking whether this still relevant to see the phenomena of Indonesian Islam today.
Okay. Shall I answer this one first? I thank you very much. It's has been, of course, very, very influential, right, by Clifford Geertz. I think from the very start, there has been a lot of questions about this division, right? Because actually, the Santri, of course, were a kind of a religious orientation, and the Abangan were also a kind of religious orientation, but Priai was not really a religious category, right? It was more of a social category. And I have actually given a lecture a few years ago on this issue, and I have submitted this for publication to a journal in Indonesia. It's called Episteme. It appears in Tulung Agung, EIN Tulung Agung. And there I have stated that it's very strange in a way how Clifford Geertz looks at religion, because when he did his fieldwork, right, in East Java in the 1960s, because he regards religion basically as a kind of a system of symbols and of rituals and of meaning giving, but he is neglecting actually the political dimension of Islam. And this goes against a little bit to my introduction, where I stated that you should not limit yourself in studying Islam to just politics. But of course, when Clifford Geertz was working in Eastern Java, at that time, the Darul Islam movement was also active there, right? And of course, the Darul Islam movement, this is evident. It was a Islamically inspired movement. So when you look to the religious landscape, like Clifford Geertz was doing, he was describing the religion of Java. It was very strange that he neglected this political expressions of Islam, and I try to link this to the idea. Excuse me, do you mind? There is someone at the door. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Ya, kita tunggu Prof. Nico sebentar. Tadi pertanyaan yang menarik dan
Sorry.
dari.
Excuse me.
It's okay, no problem.
I'm very sorry. This is the problem of working at home. My wife is not here, so but so this but I think this distinction from Clifford Geertz, if you leave out the Priai, what remains is the Santri and the Abangan, and well, these two categories might help. But I have always thought it was a bit of a strange book, because when I had not read a book and I started to read a book, I was expecting that, well, he started his work, he started to describe what he saw around him, and then at the end, he would conclude that you had these three categories, right, of Santri, Piriai, and Abangan. But this is where he starts with, right? This is the first sentence of the book. So this is a little bit strange. And so this is as far, but I think uh, Clifford Geertz' theory is for today maybe not really helpful any longer, because he is only looking to religion from, let's say, particular angle, and does not have a complete integrated vision on Islam, right? Which was also, which I also stressed at the beginning, right? In the line with Shahab Ahmed, what is Islam? You approach Islam from as many as different angles as possible, right? So it does include politics, right? Okay. So then the second question, I also missed the line. Can you repeat this? It had to do with Arabs, Amelia?
Yeah, the second question, I think about the importance of the Arabic language,
Oh, yes.
the Arabic language, yeah,
Yeah.
for the study of.
That is also a very important question, part 3. And I think um, Arabic has always been very, very important in Indonesian Islam among the ulama, uh, not only for studying it, but you know, also a lot of Indonesian ulama have also written in Arabic, right? And uh, there are so many examples, right? For instance, this Kiai, what is it, Ahsan Jampasi, who wrote in the 1950s or 60s or so, still an Arabic book uh, about smoking, the permissibility of smoking of tobacco. So I think Arabic is really important language for the study of Islam in Indonesia. And I think that there are still so very, very many in Arabic which have not been explored yet, and which might be important for the study of Islam in Indonesia. For instance, I mentioned a few examples. I already mentioned that I'm working on Ahmed Khalid Kabawi. He wrote in Arabic, but he also wrote in Malay. And I will publish a book about his biography. And he wrote this in Arabic. I have made English translation, and now I'm writing the comments of this translation, and then I will publish it. And it is an important source because it shows a lot about the contacts between him, Mecca, and in Indonesia. But there are also very, very other important Arabic sources which have not been explored yet. For instance, if you take other scholars like Abdul Hamid Kudus, which is who was also an important scholar, there are all kinds of books written by him. For instance, his Jaza in Arabic, which are available in Mecca, in the mosque, the great mosque, and well, these sources are also, of course, important to study it. And I have written a few years ago a small article. It was published in the journal Nusantara Head of Department, in which I said, well, there should be a kind of a very large catalog which lists all the Arabic works which have been written by Indonesian scholars in the past, because this is a kind of an instrument through which you can better reconstruct the history of Islamic thinking by Muslim scholars in Indonesia. And you already have this one for Africa. It's called Arabic in Africa. But we should also have a project describing Arabic literature in Indonesia. But of course, this will be huge because there have been so many scholars who have been writing in Arabic, people like Nawawi Band and Ahmed Khatib al-Minangkabau, but also, of course, Hadrami scholars, and not only when they were located in the Middle East, but also when they were working in Indonesia, right? And if you look at the pesantren mission in Indonesia, you also know that if you want to study this properly, you should be able to have access to the Arabic sources, because there are so very many Arabic sources in the curriculum, for instance, but also in the language and so on and so forth. And it also depends, of course, what period of the history you are studying. But if you talk about gaps in the Islamic history of Indonesia, I think there is still a lot to gain from here. You can do very, very original research by focusing on the Arabic literature. Do you have anything particular in mind, or can I ask you about the background of the question? Are you working on this yourself, for instance, or interested yourself?
Yes, Professor, I have a background in, sorry? Sorry, Professor, I have a background in history for my bachelor degree, and I also attended the madrasah for my primary school and secondary school, or junior high school, sorry, Professor.
No, sure. And well, what is of course also important, if you want to study the Hadrami community in Indonesia or in other places, because they also use Arabic a lot. So, for instance, for my own book on Sayyid Usman, who was a mufti in Batavia, you need to know Arabic because a lot of his books are in Arabic. A lot of his fatwas are also in Arabic, and there are also some letters which he wrote in Arabic. For instance, when he contacted his boss, Snooker Gronje, he wrote in Arabic. And it's also known when Snooker Gronje and Sayyid Usman were speaking in Batavia together, they were speaking in Arabic, right? So Arabic is a really important issue. It also, for instance, this Ahmed Khatib, he has also given very, very fatwas at the request of people from Indonesia. And it seems most of the time he gave fatwas in Arabic. So if you would, this collection of fatwas is not known. I spoke to a person recently that perhaps it might be in an archive in Malaysia. But if you would have these fatwas, you would learn through these fatwas a lot about the issues which were important in Indonesian society, because the people from Indonesia asked these fatwas on issues which were difficult for them, right? Of course, they asked, for instance, he wrote, Ahmed Khatib wrote a book about this, but for instance, they asked him, uh, we have now in Indonesia, so the 1912, we have now the Sarkat Islam. Can we, being Muslims, can we join the Sarkat Islam? Because it seems when you want to enter Sarkat Islam, you have to pledge an oath to make a sumpah, right? And is it allowed from a Muslim point of view to make this oath, right? So if you would have the other fatwas, it would really be marvelous to see about what kind of issues were really important in Indonesia. And this is, of course, another important source in would be an important source to refine the history of Islam in Indonesia and to add to the history of Islam in Indonesia. But this is indeed a very, thank you, Patri, very important question. Thank you.
You're welcome, Professor Ramadan.
Very good, thank you. If I may, there is one more question for Prof. Diko from Pak Zulkifli Abdillah. Pak Zulkifli, silahkan bisa bertanya langsung. Pak Zulkifli-nya masih adakah memantau? Oke, kalau Pak Zulkifli-nya masih ada nih. Oke, mungkin saya ini aja ya, saya bacakan pertanyaannya. I will read his question, Prof. Niko. Bisakah sejarah Islam di Indonesia ditulis berbasis sumber lokal yang sangat kaya? Folklore, legenda, silsilah, dan berbagai model manuskrip sebagai sumber terpercaya layaknya sumber tertulis lain. Jadi his point is about whether we could use it as a trusted sources. Silakan, Prof. Niko.
Yeah. Okay. This is a very, very good thing. I think if you want to study a particular issue, and in this case, then Islam in Indonesia, I think you should try to have as many sources and different sources as you have, right? Of course, we have the local sources, right? Can be in forms of texts, but if you, especially for the older periods, what is also important is that you have archaeological sources, right? So, for instance, can be gravestones. There are many important, interesting examples of this in Indonesia. Of course, these gravestones have the advantage that they have not been changed over time. Once a gravestone has been made, people are not going to change it or make it nicer and so on and so forth. This is, of course, very different from if you have Islamic texts. If you have like Sejarah Melayu, this has been, this is important, for instance, to reconstruct the early history of Islam in Southeast Asia. But of course, these texts might have changed later. They might have, for instance, put particular developments in a different light, or they might have praised someone who did not really play a big role, and so on and so forth. So that you do not have with stones. Other sources can be, for instance, coins. Can be, for instance, architecture. And what is, of course, if we speak about Islam in Indonesia, of course, we also have a lot of colonial sources, right? Dutch sources. We have the archives, and I think, of course, the Dutch sources very often have a particular approach. They were basically interested in, let's say, security issues. For instance, the revolts in Java, like in Banten, you see that the colonial reports, they are interested in who did it and so on and so forth, and less in the background of the person. But this is also important. These are important sources, and so I think you should use as many sources as possible. For instance, now in my book on Ahmed Khatib, I have also used a lot of colonial sources, right? And an issue, of course, we have been touching upon this already a number of times. The issue with the colonial sources is, of course, also the language, right? We have been discussing language issues like Sundanese, Arabic, and so on and so forth, but also these colonial sources are in Dutch, right? So this can be a problem if you really want to have access to sources. You should learn Dutch, like Professor Amelia did, for instance. So my this is well, try to use as many different sources as possible, and you can compare the sources. You can one source adds to the other, and so on and so forth. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for your insights. I think we are in the end of a few minutes before we need to end this webinar. The last thing that hal terakhir yang tadi disampaikan Prof. Niko adalah terkait penggunaan sumber. Jadi mengatakan bahwa itu justru yang tadi disampaikan dari awal, penggunaan sumber lokal itu menjadi sangat penting yang bisa menggali kekayaan, menggali informasi lebih banyak, lebih dalam lagi. Dan sayangnya saat ini tuh sebenarnya belum banyak ya, masih lebih harus lebih banyak lagi yang menggali, karena kalau saya ke perpustakaan Leiden itu banyak sekali naskah manuskrip yang banyak yang belum di-studi. Jadi termasuk tadi penggunaan fatwa, saya kira itu penting juga, bisa membuka perspektif, mendapat kekayaan data yang luar biasa menarik dan penting untuk apapun yang sedang kita kaji. Sebelum saya berikan ke Miss Febri, saya kira poin yang terakhir tadi dari Prof. Niko tentang penggunaan sumber dan poin-poin yang sebelumnya mengenai tentang bagaimana melihat studi sejarah dan studi Islam itu menjadi poin yang sangat penting. It really opens our mind, membuka perspektif kita tentang, akhirnya kita bisa simpulkan justru masa depan studi sejarah Islam itu cerah, kira-kira seperti itu, dengan kekayaan yang kita punya. Jangan khawatir, jangan takut tentang ada revolusi 4.0 dan seterusnya, dan tentang teknologi yang semakin canggih. Jangan lupa bahwa teknologi itu untuk manusia, untuk manusia. Jadi kalau kita mengkaji aspek manusia itu tidak akan pernah istilahnya tidak akan pernah hilang pentingnya. Jadi akan selalu penting. Jadi saya kira itu poin yang penutup dari saya. If you want to add more, Prof. Nick, Prof. Kapten, untuk mengakhiri diskusi ini sebelum, if you have something to say.
Yeah, maybe final remark. The title of my talk was, "Is there a future for Islamic history?" If I speak with you and if I hear the interesting questions and the interesting discussions, I can be optimistic and we can say, yes, there is a future for Islamic history, right? So I really enjoyed myself. It was a pleasure to be with you. It was nice to see you. And I do hope that you will remain well in this very difficult situation for all of us in the whole world. We are in lockdown again in the Netherlands, but we try to make the best of it, and we try to read as much as possible so that we can come out. We can perhaps visit some friends again and go to some conferences and share our reading. And in the meantime, I wish all of you a good holiday and a very good start of the new year, which hopefully will be better than 2020. We just are about to finish. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Prof. Nico Kapten. It was so wonderful to have a good discussion with you and with the students. Terima kasih tadi atas doanya, sama-sama. We also hope for you the best, for your healthy, for your productivity for next year. Semoga lockdown-nya cepat selesai di Belanda. It was really enjoyable discussion to me, and hopefully next time you are willing to share again your insight, your knowledge. Thanks so much. Saya kembalikan ke Miss Febri.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Nico and Professor Amelia Fauzia for hosting this Open Minds. So let's give our applause to our speaker today. Thank you so much, Professor. Okay, and so sebelum ditutup acara ini, mohon Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman sekalian, rekan-rekan sekalian, jangan lupa mengisi formulir kehadiran ya. Jadi mengisi formulir kehadiran absensi itu untuk kami mengirimkan e-sertifikat peserta kepada Bapak Ibu dan rekan-rekan sekalian. Jadi jangan lupa diisi Google Form-nya. Bisa didapat di kolom chat, mungkin bisa dibantu Gita untuk Google Form absensinya. Baik Bapak Ibu, alhamdulillah kita sudah sampai di penghujung acara. Tadi juga sudah di-close oleh Bu Amelia Fauzia. Jadi optimis ya, optimis bahwa ada masa depan yang cerah mudah-mudahan insya Allah untuk sejarah Islam. Baik, saya Febria Afia mewakili segenap panitia mengucapkan terima kasih banyak atas partisipasi dan kehadiran teman-teman, rekan-rekan, Bapak Ibu, dosen, peneliti semuanya, bahkan ini ada di berbagai daerah juga ya di Indonesia. Kami mengucapkan terima kasih banyak, masih terus setia hadir di Open Minds. Dan jangan lupa, insya Allah bulan depan kita ada lagi. Jadi terus kami akan mengirimkan informasi juga lewat email, apalagi buat Bapak Ibu yang sudah pernah daftar Open Minds. Oke, mari kita tutup acara ini dengan membaca hamdalah. Alhamdulillahirrabbilalamin. Semoga apa yang sudah kita diskusikan bersama di Open Minds bermanfaat buat kita semua ya. Baik, terima kasih banyak dan kami juga mohon maaf bila masih banyak kekurangan, ditunggu saran, kesan, pesan buat Open Minds. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Oh ya, sebelumnya kita foto bersama dulu ya. Kita foto bersama dulu. Wait a minute, Professor. We are going together. Okay. So everyone, you can turn on your video. Make sure you turn on your video. Okay. All right. Ready? Yeah. Okay. I'm waiting. All of you turn on your video. Okay. So how? Okay. So 1, 2. Again. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Some of you are on board, yeah? Yeah. Once again. Okay. Okay, so that's all. Thank you. See you again.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you. Bye. Bye.
Bye, Miss.
Okay, so is there some... So Gita already gone.